Hello and welcome to Legislative Report with your state representative Doyle Heffley, representing the 122nd District in Carbon County. Boy, there's a lot been happening this spring and through the summer so far legislatively and in Harrisburg, and we're going to get to that with Representative Doyle Heffley. Welcome.
Thank you, Herb. It's great to be here.
Let me start with obviously the biggest issue that rolls around beginning of every summer, and that is the state budget. Yeah. We have a new state budget now, and we know what's in it, but let's talk about the process, because that's sometimes something that's not explored too much. Yeah, this is your second budget, I believe, now you've been through. Talk about how the process worked for you this year.
Well, obviously the first year we came in, we were looking at a $4 billion structural deficit in the budget, and we were able to make some tough choices, but provide the basic services, close that budget gap, at the same time not raise taxes. Obviously, one thing that we've heard loud and clear is that people can't afford to pay higher taxes, whether it be property taxes, income taxes, or anything else. Businesses have already left the area because of that tax burden. So we need to come about with solutions that are going to work without increasing that burden on our citizens. This year we came into the budget. Obviously, the governor gave his address earlier this year, and we looked at the governor's proposal. We worked with that. Obviously, I made very clear to leadership and the governor's office as to what my priorities were between education, also human services, and making sure that that money is going to be distributed properly back to the counties, and that there's going to be adequate funding for those programs. So those are my priorities as I went through it. In talking to leadership and other members of our caucus to build consensus as to what we need to address. And I heard loud and clear from the different advocacy groups back in my district. I don't look at them necessarily as advocacy groups, but just obviously people with concerns. We spend about a month, at least maybe 2 to 3 days a week, with different people coming in, whether it be the different organizations regarding education or human services or intellectual disabilities, and talking with them and listening to what their concerns were. We sat down with the Area Agency on Aging, so you can take all that information and bring that back to Harrisburg. I generally like to conduct a lot of tele-town hall meetings and also breakfast meetings, town hall style, throughout the county. So I can also listen to the people that are in charge of those agencies, but listen to the people that are receiving benefits or relying on some of those benefits for their existence. And you have senior citizens who work their whole lives, who have seen their savings wiped out. I want to make sure that they're going to be able to heat their homes and be able to put food on their table. You have folks that have loved ones that have disabilities, and we'll make sure that those people are taken care of. And at the same time, we work to close a lot of the loopholes in our welfare programs. People are not going to abuse and take advantage of the system. If somebody's abusing or essentially stealing from the system, we're taking away from the folks that are really needing it. And that's one of the things that I was proud as a caucus. We've worked to close some of those loopholes, tighten that up. I have some legislation that I'm proposing that will make it illegal for people that are here illegally, illegal immigrants, to benefit from using access cards. And I think, people understand that we're in tough times, and we understand that we need to take care of certain, parts of our society, but at the same time, people are very disturbed when they see people taking advantage of it, and I think that's one of the things that we've been working on in this past budget process.
So obviously communication is very important to you, hearing from your constituents and then passing those thoughts along to leadership. Now you're a young, a relatively recent elected member. I'll also say a young member of the House.
Well, thank you.
But do you feel then, as a rank and file member, that you definitely had a voice in this process?
Oh, yes, I definitely think we had a voice in this process, and it's about building consensus. Obviously, a democracy, it's not a dictatorship. I don't get everything that I want, but it's about building consensus. And if you look at what impacts the folks in Carbon County and the 122nd that I represent, and what impacts the folks in Northampton, Lehigh, or the surrounding counties, or Hazleton, it's a lot of the same issues. So I worked with other members, worked across the line, across the aisle with Democratic members to build a consensus for different thoughts, and whether we move forward legislatively or through the budget process, so that we're making sure that we're moving forward as a state, representing Carbon County, but also as a state to pass a budget that makes sense and takes care of those vital needs. But at the same time, we're moving forward so that the policies that we're putting in place now next year and the year after are going to spur that economic growth and spur that job creation, so that it's going to be a little bit easier, that we don't have to be faced with some of the tough decisions that we're faced with right now.
I want to talk a little bit later in the program about the issues that are important to your district, the ones that you've been hearing about from your constituents. But first of all, you mentioned legislation, and again, you don't have a lot of experience so far, years in the House, but yet you've kind of dived right into getting involved in the legislative process. Talk about some of your bills. I know there's one that's near and dear to your heart that has to do with veterans and increasing their job opportunities.
Yeah, I know, taking from some of the experience I had in the private sector in providing opportunities and jobs for veterans that were returning home, I worked with the company that I worked with at that time to build in a policy that we would recognize the experience that our soldiers have as they come back, whether they be truck drivers or any other mechanics, that they would recognize that experience in qualifying for jobs. Now, when I got here to the State House, I seen that our state doesn't always do that. So we put forth a proposal that would say that state agencies and licensing boards must recognize experience. So if you have somebody that was maybe a truck driver, electrician, or anything in the service, and they already have that training and they have that hands-on experience, it only makes sense that our state should recognize that. We shouldn't have to pay to retrain them. We shouldn't have to hold up their opportunities to provide for their family when they come back to have to go back to school if they already have that training. This legislation passed unanimously through the House. I think it's important that when we work on proposals, we build that consensus. I was very happy to see that pass unanimous right now, and I'm hoping, I'm sure we're going to get this moving and get it passed. So.
I'm interested in your opinion on this. A lot of Republicans in the House and in general in the Republican platform, there's often a belief that one group should get preference over another group, that we should all have an equal opportunity. What in the case of veterans, say seeking employment, what makes them different in your mind in terms of trying?
It's not providing any preference. It's just recognizing the training that they already have.
Right.
If you're not a veteran, and we want to make sure that we're creating jobs for everybody. The first step is to make sure that we're recognizing the training that they have, but then also to create those opportunities for job growth and business growth in our communities. So that's all part of it. It's not just a one segment of it's an overall policy to create economic growth. But I think that we're putting veterans at a disadvantage if we're not honoring the experience and the training that they had. No more than if you go to out-of-state college and come back to Pennsylvania, that diploma still means the same in Pennsylvania. So it's the same if a veteran goes and serves for 4 years or 6 years or 12 years in the military, or even 30 years, and has that training, that world-class training that they've already gone through and had the experience. We should recognize that as a state.
And I guess that's what I was getting at, is not so much that they have an advantage, or you're seeking to give them an advantage. Some people might see it that way, but really a lot of times they're disadvantaged coming in because of their situation.
Yeah, just leveling the playing field. I mean, our troops come back and now they're transitioning into civilian life, and they shouldn't have to wait and go back through retraining when they've already had it, because it's also an expense to the taxpayer if we're paying to send them back to school. So I mean, if they want to go to school to pursue other other careers, they're entitled to that. But if they want to look for a job in the field that they've been trained in, we should recognize that.
That's a good point. Now, that's a bill that has been introduced. Where are we at with that bill?
Well, right now it has passed unanimously through the House, and it's in the Senate. I did get commitments through or not commitments, but I have talked to the Senate staff and have the governor's team on board at this point. So hopefully we'll be able to get that passed and signed into law. Very
good. And I know there's some bills now that you, looking into the future, you want to introduce. Let's talk about a few of those. One is on telehealth. What is that all about?
Well, we introduced the bill 1939, telehealth, and it was in the Health Service Committee. And that goes back, once again, to talking to the hospitals, and in both the larger hospitals and our smaller rural hospitals in my district. I met with Blue Mountain Health Systems, the St. Luke's and Miners, and I was really impressed with the technology that they've been bringing on and have on board. One of the things I read years ago was that the military, they can actually do surgery, have a surgeon in North America do surgery in Europe just through computer technology. But yet at the state level, we don't recognize even the simplest doctor visit. So what the telehealth proposal would do is it would require Medicaid reimbursement for telehealth services. So if you have a patient that comes into your rural hospital, Right now, we're a half hour to 45 minutes away from larger hospitals. If they need to see a specialist on a weekly or a monthly basis, they can come right into our hospital network, and through telecommunication, high imaging cameras, and almost like a Skyping process, but much more advanced technology, can talk to a specialist, whether they be in the Lehigh Valley, Philadelphia, or even Pittsburgh, and this would help to assist those programs by having Medicaid reimburse that. It's used quite a bit in dealing with diabetics and wound care. It's also for burn centers. So if we can keep those patients in our community hospitals at Blue Mountain or St. Luke's, Minersville, we keep those jobs in our communities. You have nurses, you have therapists that are providing the treatment, and yet we have doctors from outside of the area that are making those diagnoses. So all around it's a cost saver because we're not transporting, using as much money in transportation, which Medicaid does reimburse. We're also keeping those patients in our local hospitals to keep those jobs locally. And thirdly, we're providing access to quality of care. I mean, who would have thought that if you go to to one of your small local hospitals anywhere across the state, that you can talk to a specialist from anywhere across the state. I mean, and that's just phenomenal access. A lot of patients don't want to drive. If you have a senior citizen, right, and they're in the hospital locally, if you take that patient and put them in the Lehigh Valley or Philadelphia, where their loved one's got to drive an hour to an hour and a half to see them, they're not going to get as many visitors. So I think it's very important that we can provide as much access locally. And I know our hospitals are really going to benefit from it, and they were big supporters of the proposal. I was very happy that we worked with DPW, and they issued a bulletin. While the legislation is still there, to me it's not about getting my name on a bill. It's about making things better for the residents in my district, and I was happy to see that DPW issued that brief, and it's something that we worked pretty hard on.
That technology is simply amazing, and I'm glad that we're able to make better use of that, hopefully through your legislation. Last thing I want to ask you about in terms of your legislation, another big issue, and we'll be talking about this after our break too, is property taxes. Mm-hmm. And I know that you have done something or want to do something that could help ease the property tax burden. Talk about that.
One of the biggest things I hear from residents across my district is property taxes. I mean, every year the taxes go up, and people are wondering, why. I think we need to look at, some of the cost, why the cost drivers to that. But one of the proposals I have right now, I was really kind of dismayed to learn that when the gaming bill was passed years ago, before I came into office, and the table games were added, none of the table game money is going into the property tax relief fund. So my proposal would direct that money out of the general fund and right into the property tax relief fund. I think Pennsylvanians were sold on a proposal that property tax relief would be granted through gaming, right, and yet we're still waiting. So this is going to add more money to that property tax relief, and that's just one step. Last year we passed Act 25, which would require voter referendum for property tax increases by local school districts above the rate of inflation. We need the voters to be involved. We need referendum so we can control some of these cost drivers. And I think it's just one step after the other. They've been debating property taxes for 40 years before I got here in Harrisburg. So I want to take all the above approach. If we can put in referendums for property tax increases, if we can take more money from the gambling to property tax relief. We passed House Bill 2300, which is an amendment to the Constitution of the state of Pennsylvania that would require school districts to look at other options and 100% reduction in property taxes. So it's just, whatever that proposal is when it comes to property taxes, I'm going to be there working for the homeowners and the property owners in my district to see some relief for property taxes.
We want to talk more about property taxes and some other issues important to your constituents, but let's take a short break right now. Legislative Report with your state representative Doyle Heffley will continue right after this.
Did you know that the chamber of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives contains a painting depicting the 24 hours of the day? Located in the center of the ceiling, the mural, titled The Hours, was created by artist Edwin Austin Abbey. This wonderful masterpiece charts the setting of the sun, moon, and the many stars that grace the heavens. 24 maidens, who each represent an hour of the day, begin each day in light and gladness and ends in solemn drapery carried on still shoulders. Now you know.
Did you know the Avenue of Flags presentation at Indiantown Gap National Cemetery has over 500 casket flags? Among the flags displayed are Commonwealth, territorial, and military flags. The flags are tied to 20-foot poles spaced 40 feet apart on both sides of the main drive of the cemetery. It takes about 2 hours to set up and take down all of the flags. Volunteers are encouraged to help with this task and must be at least 13 years of age. All of the flags are donated to the Avenue of Flags by families of the deceased. Now you know.
Welcome back to Legislative Report with your State Representative Doyle Heffley, representing the 122nd District in Carbon County. And before the break, we were talking about issues important to the voters and the constituents in Carbon County. Representative Heffley, I want to continue on with what we were talking about prior to the break, and that is property taxes. Yeah. You mentioned a couple of things that your colleagues have suggested. This is, and you also said this has been an argument that's been going on for decades.
Yes.
Talk about a little bit more about some of the suggestions for solutions to this situation and kind of where you stand on them.
Well, obviously, I would support for any bill that came up on the House floor to eliminate or reduce property taxes. I would be voting for it. You know, it's one thing I've heard loud and clear, and it's an unfair tax. It really burdens senior citizens and families. But right now there's a couple proposals. 1776 is one proposal that was looking at a tax shift to more or less a sales tax and an EIT and PIT tax statewide. That right now is under consideration in the House, and also there's a...
And that would totally eliminate property taxes.
Yes, that would,
the school property taxes.
Yeah, the school property taxes, and that's the biggest tax. Whether, you know, what I hear from a lot of folks when they talk about property taxes, they're generally focused on the schools, on the school district property taxes. Okay. Obviously, some of the other proposals would be for local options, for local counties or districts to opt into more of a EIT or a PIT or a 1% sales tax, or expanding that sales tax on other items in order to reduce those property taxes. Right now, with property tax, you have a very small segment of society that is paying 100% of the taxes. If you expand that to other tax forms, then you would have 100% of the folks that are shopping or using those services that would be paying taxes. But anytime you get into that, you look at how do we make sure that we provide adequate funding for our schools so that our children are getting the best education. I think that there's a good opportunity for possibly some local options to shift away. But I think anything that we do, we have to make sure that if we're going to do a tax shift, that we're going to stop any kind of rates of increase in property taxes. So I'd like to see any proposal would have to be an automatic reduction in what you're paying in property taxes, and then a stop for any rate increases. The last thing we would ever want to do is pass a bill to expand another tax and then see property taxes still remain. So that's but we have a very diverse state, and we got to build that consensus among my colleagues as to how we can really address this and pull enough votes out of the House and the Senate to pass this legislation. It's something that I feel very passionate about, and I know as part of the Property Tax Caucus we've had a lot of discussions, and anytime we can pass another proposal to move that ball down the field, I think that's obviously I want to be there and be part of that process. Because I pay the same property taxes, and I'm sure you as well, and it's just something desperately needs to be done with it.
Very good. Let's talk about jobs. That is probably the second biggest issue in just about anybody's district. Yes. There are a number of things happening. Again, proposals of various sorts, but maybe let's talk about the most exciting thing really to come along in terms of boosting Pennsylvania's job growth, and that is the Marcellus shale industry. There's a delicate balance there between jobs and the environment. Yes. How do you feel?
Well, obviously, as somebody who I still get my water at my house from my own well, so I have great concerns when you talk about water quality and making sure we're protecting the environment. I do enjoy the outdoors. I was an Eagle Scout, and I spent a lot of time, still do a lot of time outdoors as much as I can. So you want to see the impacts of any industry that comes in to make sure that it's going to be safeguarded. In Carbon County, we're still dealing with the ramifications from a coal industry from 100 years ago that didn't have these safeguards in place. And in my hometown of Palmerton, we're dealing with the fallout from the New Jersey zinc plant and the Superfund site there. So as technologies have advanced, we have seen the development of different types of processes to extract energy. I am one of the all of the above for when it comes to energy. I talk to people in my district that are paying, not only their property taxes being so high, but then, their energy bills are going through the roof, and they can barely afford to heat their homes. We see natural gas right now is at a 6 to 8 year low. A lot of people are transitioning from home heating oil to natural gas to heat their homes. There's a lot of opportunity for natural gas development for vehicles. I think it's about $1 a gallon versus $4 a gallon. Plus, that $1 a gallon is staying in Pennsylvania, providing Pennsylvania jobs, Pennsylvania taxes, more or less than passing that money and supporting OPEC or the Middle Eastern, oil cartels. So I think it's important that we look at domestic production of whether it be natural gas or solar or wind. But I was happy this past year we passed Act 13. And what that does is it provides the industry with a basis as they know what their operating costs are going to be moving forward. And at the same time, it sets up a separate fund to deal with the local impacts to the environment and to make sure there's environmental protections in place and also money available going forward, so that we're not going to pass on a legacy like the old coal industry did to our children. Mm-hmm. We're going to make sure it's responsible. And I think Act 13 is a balance. I don't know that it was a perfect bill, but it was a good balance in environmental protection and providing some money that's needed to deal with those impacts, but at the same time gave some stability to the industry. The last thing we want to do is just drive off these industries that are creating jobs and providing clean, efficient energy to the public. I think it's one of the great opportunities we have moving forward.
Have you yourself been to the site of a natural gas well drilled into Marcellus Shale?
Yes, I've visited 3 sites in my tenure. I think it's very important to go out and visit as many locations as possible to really get the hands-on feel as we make these decisions here. Also, in my private life, or the private sector that I worked in, we dealt a lot with not necessarily Marcellus, but a lot of heavy industries. Mm-hmm. So I was somewhat impressed with some of the safety standards. Obviously, Pennsylvania has the highest set of standards for the environmental protection of any state in dealing with this type of development for energy. So I was happy to see that, and I want to see that moving forward. Definitely I've sat and talked with the different environmental groups in my office, and I've also gone out for site visits to some of the locations in my district to strike that balance and look to gather as much information. And I think we did that in Act 13. Like I said, I don't know that it's perfect, but I think the environmental safeguards are good, and it's going to provide our local governments with guidelines as to how to proceed to protect the environment. And also, it takes some of that money and puts it into infrastructure. It's one of the things that desperately is needed across our state. So part of that money that's coming out of those impact fees is going to repair roads and bridges throughout the Commonwealth, because the equipment that's going to make these deliveries, it's not just operating in that borough or county where the gas drilling is, but this equipment is coming from across our state, bringing materials in and out. So all of our roads are seeing that impact. So this is going to set some of that money aside for counties to work on bridge projects, which are desperately needed. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. And as we build those pipelines and bring more and more of that gas to market, you're going to see home heating costs reduced. You're also going to see businesses and enterprises taking a second look at Pennsylvania to say, we can operate in Pennsylvania because their energy costs are consistent. Last year alone, we saved over $60 billion in this country purchasing natural gas from domestic production versus shipping it overseas to buy natural gas on a world market. Those are the types of ideas. If you look at the microcosm, what is Carbon County in Pennsylvania, but as our nation moves forward, we've got to get a handle on our energy needs, and I think this is a good step in the right direction.
Let me touch on a couple. We only have a few minutes left. A couple of other quick points about jobs and proposals and things that are out there. There's something called the Delaware loophole, and I know that you and your Republican colleagues in the House and Senate have been working on trying to create a better climate for business in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
What is this Delaware? How does it do that? The Delaware loophole.
Well, what the vote to close the Delaware loophole would take those businesses that have circumvented our taxing policies here in our state, which we have one of the highest taxes not only in the nation but in the world here in Pennsylvania with our corporate net income taxes and our federal taxes. Plus, we talked a little bit about the regulations, and this is going to close the Delaware loophole where businesses were setting up shop out of state, operating here. So that put more and more of a burden on your local businesses who were operating and paying the taxes. It's going to close that loophole, but at the same time, as we bring those people, those companies back to paying their taxes here, it's also going to look at years forward reducing the corporate net income tax, which is something that we've heard loud and clear from job creators and businesses across the state, is that our corporate income taxes are too high. When was the last time we've seen a major company moving into Pennsylvania? Most of them moving out. I mean, even Hershey, which is the namesake here in Pennsylvania, is looking at moving out. It's not necessarily always for cheaper labor. It's because of our burdensome tax structure. So if we can make sure all the companies are paying the taxes and then also look at reducing them to level the playing field and make it more competitive, that's how we're going to continue to spur economic growth. That, coupled with the fact that we have, a reliable and cost-effective source of energy, I think that's definitely things that are going to move our state forward in the right direction. Earlier, we talked about the budget. And every year we're going to pass a budget, and Pennsylvania dictates it must be a balanced budget. We have two methods to balance that budget. Either we look for efficiencies in government or we raise taxes. I choose to look for efficiencies in government, provide a quality of service, and lessening the tax burden. But as we move forward, the policies that we put in place so that 5 years from now or 6 years from now when my daughters are looking for jobs and our kids are growing up and looking for jobs, that there's going to be opportunities there for them in our state. And it's also going to create a tax base so we don't have to continue to rely on property taxes. We're going to have business paying those taxes like we had in the past. And those are the things that are going to move our state forward.
We're going to have to wrap it up. Before we do, earlier in the program we talked about communication, you communicating with your constituents. I know you do that through your district offices, district office in Carbon County. Talk about how you communicate and how you've improved that process, perhaps even saved taxpayer money.
Yeah. Yes, we run a very efficient operation. I have three full-time staff and one part-time staff. We operate 2 full-time offices and 1 satellite office in Lansford. We have an office in Lehighton. We have an office in Albrightsville and a satellite office in Lansford Borough at the American Legion, which are a gracious host. And we're able to provide those services, whether they be property tax or rent rebates. We had one of the busiest offices across the state in dealing with PennDOT. People shouldn't have to sit on the phone and press 1 or 2 to deal with their state agencies. When they come to my office, they sit down, they talk to somebody who's been trained and can handle whatever problems they may have with state or even the federal government sometimes to get those things taken care of. Cut through the red tape. If somebody needs a handicap placard or somebody's having a problem getting a birth certificate, we can work to get those things resolved. And I think that's one of the more rewarding things is that when people come in to the office and we're able to help them. I know we were able to cut through the red tape for some funding, for some programs for DPW, people that had children that had some special needs, and it's very rewarding when people come up to you and thank you and to be able to get something done. And those are the things that I like to do, cut through the red tape, make life a little bit easier.
Representative Doyle Heffley, representing the 122nd District in Carbon County, thanks for coming here and sharing some of your thoughts with us.
Well, thank you, Herb.
That is all the time we have for this program. If you have any questions on what you've just seen or heard, you can contact Representative Doyle Heffley at his district office or through his website, and that information will be on your screen in just a moment. Thanks for watching, and please join us next time for Legislative Report with your state representative, Doyle Heffley.